In July 2001, Psion, the British pioneer that practically invented the pocket computer, suddenly canceled its next-generation consumer devices, abandoning a hardware market it had created. Years earlier, in 1984, the company introduced the organizer to British high streets. By 1997, the Psion Series 5 was the ultimate mobile tool, dominating European briefcases with its legendary tactile keyboard and an operating system that ran for months on 2 AA batteries. But then the cheaper Palm Pilot arrived, quickly followed by data-connected cell phones. When Psion shut down its hardware division, dedicated users lost a brilliant mobile typing tool. A thriving developer ecosystem was left completely stranded. The paradox is that Psion didn't fail because its machines were broken. It failed because the global market prioritized the convenience of a single mobile phone over the mechanical perfection of a dedicated pocket computer. But the real story of Psion is not simply about a discontinued device. It is the story of how a British company engineered the absolute peak of mobile productivity, only to lose the future to a flat sheet of glass. Every week, we document the forgotten British machines, operating systems, and high-street ecosystems that taught the country what the digital future felt like, and what happened when the global market moved on. Subscribe if that history matters to you. The story begins not with nostalgia, but with a specific place in London in 1980. The story begins not with a piece of hardware, but with software in London in 1980. David Potter, a former university academic, founded a company with an ambitious name, Potter Scientific Instruments or Nothing, which soon contracted to Psion. The original goal was to build advanced hardware, but in the early 1980s, the quickest route to capital in the British technology market was writing code for the booming home computer industry. A home computer, a machine sold for household use, usually connected to a television and loaded with software via cassette tape, was rapidly redefining the British living room. The Sinclair ZX81 had just put computing onto the kitchen table at an affordable price, and Psion began by writing software for it. They developed Flight Simulation, a game that miraculously squeezed a 3D flying experience into a machine with a tiny fraction of the memory found in a modern email. The software arrived on a cassette tape, magnetic tape that used sound to deliver code into the machine. A teenager in a British bedroom would press play on a tape recorder, listen to a screeching audio signal for several minutes, and wait for the screen to blink into life. This early success tied Psion to the Sinclair ecosystem. When Sinclair launched the ill-fated QL computer, aimed at the business market, it was Psion who wrote the bundled software suite, a word processor, a spreadsheet, and a database. This work forced Psion to learn how to design serious, productive applications. But David Potter's ambition was never to just supply software for other people's screens. He wanted to change where computing happened. In 1984, the British tech landscape was highly localized and entirely stationary. The BBC Micro, a heavy beige machine bought for classrooms and lessons, sat securely in the school computer room. The ZX Spectrum dominated the bedroom desk. The workplace had the desktop PC. But the moment a user walked out the front door, the digital world was left behind. The pocket belonged entirely to the analog era. The paper diary, the filofax, the printed address book, and the pocket calculator. If a worker needed to record data outside the office, they used a clipboard and a pen. To put a computer into a pocket required breaking the existing rules of hardware design. A desktop machine drew endless power from a wall plug. A pocket machine had to survive on batteries. A desktop computer used a floppy disk, a removable magnetic storage format, to save files. A pocket device needed a way to store data permanently without spinning motors or fragile moving parts. Psion's answer arrived in 1984 with the Psion Organizer I, released onto the shelves of British high street shops like Dixon's. It did not look like the future. It looked like a thick, oversized calculator protected by a hard, sliding plastic cover that snapped shut with a satisfying mechanical click. The keyboard was laid out alphabetically, not in the standard QWERTY format, which meant users had to hunt and peck for letters. But beneath the calculator aesthetic, it contained a true microprocessor. The real breakthrough, however, was how it stored information. Because standard memory chips wiped themselves completely the moment the battery died, Psion introduced the data pack. This used EEPROM, erasable programmable read-only memory, a solid-state chip that permanently held whatever was written to it completely independent of a power source. A user could type in a database of contacts, save it to the data pack, and the data was physically safe. The compromise was the erasure process. A user could not simply press a delete key to free up space. Once a data pack was full, it had to be removed and blasted with strong ultraviolet light for 20 minutes to wipe the chip clean. Often, users had to take their full data cards back to a computer shop to have them reset. It was a bizarre physical limitation, yet it proved that a digital database could live safely in a coat pocket. The organizer I was an experiment. The true shift in British computing habits happened 2 years later, in 1986, with the Organizer 2. Psion expanded the screen to a two-line LCD. They improved the keyboard and the file system. But crucially, they built a programming language directly into the device, OPL, or Organizer Programming Language. Suddenly, the device was no longer just a digital address book locked to the manufacturer's ideas. It was an open platform, a technology system that other developers and users could build upon. A user sitting on a train could write a custom program directly on the device. But the real impact was felt away from the consumer market. The Organizer 2 featured an expansion slot that allowed peripherals, like barcode scanners, to be plugged directly into the top of the machine. This turned a pocket computer into a mobile retail terminal. Marks & Spencer, the cornerstone of the British high street, purchased thousands of units. Instead of relying on paper clipboards, shop floor workers walked the aisles scanning items and typing stock levels into their Psion organizers. The British government deployed them. Surveyors used them in muddy fields to run complex land calculations. This enterprise adoption provided the critical cash flow Psion needed. A device that had started as a strange consumer gadget behind the glass counter of a high-street electronics shop had quietly become an invisible layer of British infrastructure. It taught the country that a computer did not need a desk, a monitor, or a mains plug to be powerful. It proved that software could be entirely mobile, running reliably on a standard 9-volt battery for months at a time. Yet the organizer was still held back by its fundamental physical shape. Its calculator-like buttons were designed for punching in data, not writing documents. The two-line screen was a narrow window, not a workspace. The user habit it created was one of data entry, not content creation. If Psion wanted to capture the executive briefcase and truly replace the laptop, they could no longer build machines that looked like calculators. The organizer had proved that computing could leave the desk. But to truly replace the computer, the pocket machine had to learn how to open. By 1991, Psion understood that if they wanted to capture the mobile professional market, they had to abandon the calculator design entirely. The upright vertical layout of the organizer was built for numeric entry, not for writing long reports, managing complex daily schedules, or drafting emails. The company needed a new hardware form factor, the physical shape and structural layout of a device that could bridge the gap between a pocket diary and a full-size desktop computer. The answer arrived in 1991 with the Psion Series 3. When closed, the machine resembled a smooth, matte black bar of soap, compact enough to slide unnoticed into the inside pocket of a suit jacket. But when opened, it transformed. Psion engineered a clamshell hinge, a mechanical folding mechanism that split the device into an upper lid, housing the screen, and a lower base housing the keyboard. For the British commuter sitting on an early morning train pulling into London Waterloo, this mechanical layout was a revelation. Opening the lid slid the keyboard slightly forward, tilting the screen at a comfortable viewing angle for a train tray table or a desk. The machine featured a wide liquid crystal display, a flat panel screen that used liquid crystals to display monochrome text and graphics without drawing heavy battery power. Beneath the screen sat a keyboard wide enough to allow two-handed touch typing, complete with physical keys that offered a firm, tactile click. Underneath the curved plastic casing lay an engineering achievement that set Psion apart from the rest of the global technology industry: SIBO, or 16-bit organizer architecture, and its newly written operating system, Epoch. An operating system, the core software that manages the computer and lets other programs run, is usually designed around continuous power from a main socket. Desktop personal computers of the early 1990s took several minutes to boot up, drew dozens of watts of electricity, generated considerable heat, and required massive cooling fans. Psion software engineers, working out of their headquarters in London, wrote Psion from scratch in assembly language to solve an entirely different set of constraints. How to deliver true multitasking, running multiple software applications simultaneously on tiny batteries without a cooling fan or a boot sequence. The technical secret of Epoch was its power efficiency. In a standard desktop computer, the processor, the main chip that performs calculations and executes instructions, runs continuously, drawing power even when waiting for the user to type a single character. Epoch turned this paradigm upside down. When a user pressed a key on the Series 3, the processor woke up in a fraction of a millisecond, processed the keystroke, rendered the letter onto the liquid crystal display, and immediately dropped back into a deep power-saving sleep state. To the user, there was no power switch and no waiting for an operating system to load. The device was instant on. Pressing the Word icon instantly opened the document exactly where the cursor had been left 3 days earlier. Pressing the Agenda key brought up the calendar in a fraction of a second. Because the operating system was so aggressively power efficient, the machine did not require heavy, expensive, rechargeable lithium packs or bulky mains adapters. The Series 3 ran on two standard AA batteries, the common alkaline battery available in every British corner shop and high street newsagent. On those two batteries, the machine could run for up to 80 hours of continuous active use, or several months of standby power. A British executive could board a flight to New York or travel across Europe for a month of business meetings without carrying a power cable or ever searching for a wall outlet. The Series 3 came pre-installed with a complete suite of productivity applications designed specifically for mobile work. It contained a word processor capable of formatting text and printing documents via an optional printer cable, a spreadsheet application, a database, a diary with multiple alarm sounds, and a world clock. Crucially, Psion retained OPL, their custom programming language, pre-installed on the device. This meant the Series 3 was not a closed appliance. It was a portable development platform. An engineer sitting in a hotel room could write a custom application to track site inspections, run financial calculations, or log stock levels, running the code immediately on the very machine they were typing on. Retailers on the British High Street embraced the device immediately. Electronics chains like Dixon's, Currys, and W.H. Smith displayed the Series 3 in prominent glass cases right alongside high-end cameras and early mobile phones. It was not marketed as a delicate electronic gadget for computer hobbyists. It was sold as a serious business tool for solicitors, accountants, doctors, field engineers, and journalists. By 1993, the sight of a passenger opening a black Psion clamshell on an inner-city 125 train had become a distinct visual symbol of British professional life. To expand storage without relying on moving mechanical parts, Psion designed its own proprietary storage medium, the solid-state disk, or SSD card. These tiny plastic cartridges slid into two slots concealed beneath the hinged keyboard. Instead of using floppy disks, removable magnetic storage formats that were bulky, slow, and prone to mechanical breakdown, the SSD cards use flash memory chips to save files safely. A thriving cottage industry of independent British software developers emerged around the platform. Small software houses built and packaged specialized financial calculators, foreign language dictionaries, travel guides, and early handheld games, selling them in colorful boxed packaging across high street shops. By the mid-1990s, with the launch of the updated Series 3A and Series 3C, which added higher resolution displays, digital voice recording, and infrared data transfer, Psion had sold well over 1 million units. They dominated the European PDA market. PDA, or Personal Digital Assistant, had become the global industry term for portable digital organizers, and Psion was the benchmark against which all foreign competitors were measured. The company had proven that mobile computing did not require copying the heavy, power-hungry design of American desktop computers. They had created a lightweight, silent, instant-on system that lived comfortably in a suit pocket for months on two household batteries. The Series 3 proved the pocket computer was real. The next machine would attempt to make it perfect. By 1997, the global technology landscape was rapidly accelerating. The desktop personal computer, powered by heavy desktop operating systems like Windows 95, had entirely conquered the office space. Laptops existed, but they were massive, expensive slabs of plastic that generated intense heat, took minutes to boot up, and exhausted their heavy lithium batteries in less than 2 hours. If a user wanted genuine portability, they had to accept severe compromises. Psion refused to accept that compromise. In the summer of 1997, the company released a machine that would come to represent the absolute peak of dedicated mobile productivity, the Psion Series 5. It was a complete architectural reset. When closed, the Series 5 still maintained the discreet dark gray profile of a premium pocket organizer. It weighed just 354 grams and was roughly the size of a thick pair of reading glasses, designed specifically to slide into a coat pocket without ruining the tailoring. But the moment a user opened it, the device performed a mechanical magic trick. As the lid was lifted, a complex internal mechanical linkage physically pushed the keyboard forward and outward over the base of the machine, while simultaneously tilting the screen backward to find the perfect viewing angle. The device expanded. A dense, compact block of plastic instantly transformed into a wide, stable typing surface that rivaled the layout of a much larger sub-notebook. This keyboard remains, even decades later, one of the greatest physical interfaces ever engineered for a mobile device. The keys were not cheap rubber nubs. They featured deep, tactile travel with a firm mechanical click. A user could truly touch type on a Series 5. Journalists drafted thousands of words on cross-channel ferries. Executives updated complex financial models on the London Underground. Novelists wrote entire chapters in hotel lobbies. Above the keyboard sat a wide half-VGA touchscreen, a display that responded to physical input. Instead of using a bulky external mouse, users interacted with the machine using a slender plastic stylus concealed inside the casing, tapping directly on the glass to open files, navigate menus, or sketch digital notes. In a train carriage or a corporate boardroom where a professional needed to work away from a desk, the right machine did not merely store contacts. It decided who could draft a contract on the move, who could calculate a spreadsheet at 60 miles per hour, and who felt the absolute power of holding a complete, instant-on mobile office in the palm of their hand. Beneath the touchscreen lay an even more impressive achievement. Psion's engineers had written an entirely new 32-bit operating system from the ground up, EPO 32. While American software companies were building operating systems that required increasingly powerful desktop processors and massive cooling fans, EPO 32 was engineered for extreme efficiency. It offered preemptive multitasking, the ability to run multiple complex programs at the same time, instantly switching between a word processor, a database, and a calendar, without ever slowing down. And remarkably, despite the touchscreen, the mechanical keyboard, and the advanced multitasking software, the Series 5 still did not require a dedicated charging cable. It ran for up to 35 hours of continuous typing on just 2 standard AA batteries. If a user ran out of power during a long-haul flight or a remote site visit, they did not have to search for a wall outlet. They simply bought 2 batteries from a local newsagent, popped them into the hidden compartment, and continued working exactly where they left off. This combination of mechanical perfection and software brilliance turned the Series 5 into a phenomenon on the high street. In retail chains like PC World, Currys, and Dixon's, the Series 5 was not hidden in a back aisle with calculator accessories. It was displayed in premium glass cabinets right at the front of the store, marketed directly to the high-earning professional class. The machine was universally praised by the technology press. Major computer magazines dedicated entire cover stories to its design. It quickly became a supreme status symbol. In the late 1990s, opening a Psion Series 5 in a public space was a quiet declaration of technological literacy. It signaled that the user was untethered from the heavy, immobile reality of the traditional desktop computer. The hardware was a masterpiece, but to truly dominate the mobile era, a pocket computer could only survive if the software ecosystem and the market around it were just as powerful. The hardware of the Series 5 was a masterpiece, but to truly dominate the mobile era, A pocket computer could only survive if the software ecosystem and the retail market around it were just as powerful. Psion understood that a closed machine would eventually starve. They needed developers and they needed third-party support. Thanks to the inclusion of OPL and later support for Java and C++, the Series 5 cultivated a fierce, dedicated developer community. Small British software houses that had cut their teeth writing code for the Sinclair ZX Spectrum or the BBC Micro a decade earlier now transitioned to writing mobile applications. The bedroom coder was growing up and becoming the commuter coder. A user could walk into a branch of PC World or Dixon's, head to the dedicated PDA aisle, and buy physical boxed software for their Psion on a tiny solid-state disk. There were route planners like Autoroute, complex financial calculators, foreign language translators, medical databases, and even surprisingly deep video games. The pocket computer had generated its own thriving, self-sustaining high-street economy. But it was not just executives and consumers buying the hardware. British enterprise adopted the Series 5 at scale. Local councils purchased fleets of the machines for social workers to update records in the field. Hospital doctors carried them in their lab coats to cross-reference drug interactions. Surveyors used them to log structural reports. By attaching a mobile modem or linking the device to a mobile phone via an infrared beam, a user could even dial into an online service, check email, or load a simple web browser while sitting in a car park. For a British professional standing on a cold station platform or waiting in a corporate reception, the right machine did not merely pass the time. It decided who was chained to a heavy desktop monitor, who could genuinely execute business from anywhere, and who truly held the power of a digital ecosystem in their coat pocket. By 1998, Psion's influence extended far beyond the glass display cabinets of the British High Street. The real power lay in the operating system they had built, EPOC32. While American giants like Microsoft were desperately trying to strip down their heavy desktop software to create Windows CE for mobile devices, EPOC32 had been built from the ground up for portable, battery-powered efficiency. It was a technical marvel, and the global telecommunications industry knew it. Recognizing that the future of the pocket computer would eventually intersect with the mobile phone, Psion made a brilliant defensive corporate maneuver. In June 1998, Psion spun off its software division and formed a joint venture with the world's biggest mobile phone manufacturers, Nokia, Ericsson, and Motorola. The new company was named Symbian. Symbian's mandate was massive. Take the EPOC32 operating system that powered the Psion Series 5 and make it the global standard for the next generation of intelligent mobile phones. For a brief, glorious moment, it seemed that the entire future of global mobile computing would be written in London. Britain was not just participating in the portable era, it was dictating the architecture. The peak of this physical hardware lineage arrived in 1999 with the release of the Psion Series 5mm Max. It retained the mechanical perfection of the folding keyboard, but doubled the memory, upgraded the processor, and dramatically improved the contrast of the touchscreen. It was faster, sharper, and cemented Psion's absolute dominance of the European PDA market. In the late 1990s, if you sat in a first-class carriage on the East Coast Main Line heading to Edinburgh, the audible sound of productivity was the rapid, tactile clicking of Psion keyboards. The company had achieved the impossible. They had taken the raw, stationary power of the personal computer and successfully compressed it into a device that felt distinctly, deliberately British, engineered for quiet, serious, uncompromised work. The machine was perfect, but the market was about to decide that perfection was no longer the priority. The first crack in Psion's dominance did not come from a bigger, faster pocket laptop. It came from an American device that discarded the physical keyboard entirely. In 1996, Palm Computing released the Palm Pilot in the United States. Unlike the Psion Series 5, which tried to put a complete, uncompromised desktop workstation into a coat pocket, the Palm Pilot was designed as a simple PC companion. It was small enough to fit inside a shirt pocket, weighed less than 6 ounces, and featured a flat monochrome screen operated by a plastic stylus using a simplified handwriting system called Graffiti. Crucially, Palm understood a fundamental shift in user behavior that Psion had overlooked. Most mobile users did not want to touch-type long documents on a train tray table. They wanted to check a calendar appointment in 5 seconds while standing in an elevator, look up a client's phone number, or make a brief note. When the user returned to their office, they placed the Palm Pilot into a plastic cradle, pressed a single button, and synchronized their data with their desktop computer in seconds. Where Psion built a standalone mobile computer, Palm built an extension of the desktop. The Palm Pilot was cheaper to manufacture, cheaper to buy, and vastly simpler to operate. It sold over 1 million units in its first 18 months on the market, rapidly eroding Psion's market share in the United States and creating a major alternative standard across Europe. At the same time, a far more dangerous corporate force was entering the handheld space. Microsoft, having secured total control over the desktop computer market with Windows 95, viewed portable computing as its next logical territory. Microsoft developed Windows CE, a stripped-down version of its desktop operating system designed specifically for handheld devices. Although early Windows CE devices were slow, power-hungry, and clumsy compared to Psion's elegant EPO32 system, Microsoft possessed advantages that no independent hardware maker could match. Endless financial reserves, deep enterprise relationships, and the ability to bundle handheld software directly into corporate IT systems. Major global hardware manufacturers like Compaq, Hewlett-Packard, and Casio licensed Windows CE to launch their own color screen handheld devices, such as the Compaq iPac. Suddenly, Psion was not just competing against innovative California startups, it was fighting the global hardware manufacturing engine of the entire PC industry. Recognizing the shift towards smaller, simpler, and more consumer-friendly devices, Psion attempted to counterattack. In 1999, they launched the Psion Revo. The Revo was a radical aesthetic departure from the dark, utilitarian design of the Series 3 and Series 5. Finished in sleek silver plastic, it was lighter, thinner, and targeted directly at young professionals and mainstream consumer users, rather than corporate executives. When opened, it retained a scaled-down version of Psion's iconic sliding keyboard and ran the full Epoch 32 operating system. On paper, it was the ultimate consumer PDA. However, in reaching for a lower price point and a slimmer profile, Psion made critical engineering compromises that would severely undermine the machine's reputation. To make the Revo ultra-thin, engineers sealed the battery inside the device, replacing standard removable AA batteries with built-in rechargeable nickel metal hydride cells. They also eliminated the solid-state disk expansion slot, leaving users with a fixed internal memory that could never be upgraded. These compromises proved fatal over time. Because users could no longer swap out AA batteries on the go, a dead Revo meant searching for a proprietary charging cradle. Worse still, as the internal batteries aged, they degraded rapidly, causing devices to lose power suddenly and wipe the user's unbacked-up data. The lack of expandable storage meant users ran out of space as digital files and software applications grew larger. While Psion struggled with battery reliability and memory constraints on the Revo, an even larger systemic shift was taking place in the background. The mobile phone was evolving. In the late 1990s, a mobile phone was a basic voice device used for calls and short text messages. But as wireless networks upgraded to digital standards and data speeds increased, phone manufacturers began adding screens, digital address books, calendars, and simple web browsers. The dedicated PDA and the mobile phone were heading toward a direct collision. By the year 2000, the mobile phone was no longer just a plastic brick used for making quick calls from a train station. Handset manufacturers like Nokia and Ericsson were rapidly adding larger liquid crystal displays, data connections, and basic email capabilities. The dedicated PDA and the mobile phone were suddenly competing for the exact same space in a user's coat pocket. This technological collision created a devastating paradox for Psion. The software company they had spun off, Symbian, was succeeding beyond all expectations. Symbian was rapidly becoming the global operating system standard for the world's first smartphones. Mobile phones that combined calling, internet access, and advanced computing power. Devices like the Ericsson R380 and the Nokia 9210 communicator ran on Symbian code, effectively putting Psion's brilliant Epoch architecture into the hands of millions of global users. But for Psion's hardware division, Symbian's success was a death sentence. The British tech market was experiencing the harsh reality of convenience displacement. A pocket computer like the Series 5 MAUX was undeniably superior for typing a long document or managing a complex spreadsheet. But the average commuter did not want to carry a mobile phone in their left pocket and a dedicated PDA in their right. If a user could check their calendar, read a text message, and look up a contact on the single device that was already connected to a mobile network, the mechanical perfection of a dedicated typing machine suddenly felt unnecessary. Convenience did not need to be perfect. It only needed to be available. In 2001, Psion attempted one last major hardware project, supposedly working on a next-generation consumer device with advanced voice and data capabilities. But the global market economics were turning against independent British hardware manufacturers. Building a mobile device now required navigating complex global telecommunication standards, massive component supply chains, and brutal price wars against immense Asian and American conglomerates. Psion was a brilliant engineering company, but it did not have the colossal scale required to fight Nokia, Microsoft, and Palm simultaneously. The breaking point arrived in July 2001. In a sudden corporate announcement that shocked the British technology press, Psion officially canceled its upcoming consumer devices and confirmed it was shutting down its consumer hardware division entirely. The British pioneer that had practically invented the pocket computer was abandoning the very market it had created. The collapse of the Psion hardware ecosystem was swift and absolute. For the British high street, the change was visible almost immediately. In branches of PC World and Dixon's across the country, the premium glass cabinets at the front of the store were cleared of Psion clamshells and replaced by rows of shiny, data-connected mobile phones. The computer magazines that had once dedicated entire sections to Psion software reviews quietly dropped their coverage. The most profound loss, however, was felt by the developers. The thriving ecosystem of independent British software houses, the companies that had built everything from travel guides to complex financial tools on solid-state disks, were left completely stranded. Without new hardware being manufactured, the user base could only shrink. Developers stopped updating their applications. Boxed PDA software slowly vanished from retail shelves, heavily discounted into clearance bins before disappearing altogether. Psion, as a corporate entity, survived. It pivoted entirely into industrial and enterprise hardware, making rugged barcode scanners for warehouses and logistics companies, far away from the consumer spotlight. Its software ghost, Symbian, would go on to dominate the global smartphone market for another decade before being utterly destroyed by the arrival of Apple's iOS and Google's Android. But the British consumer hardware dream, the idea that a London company could dictate how the professional world typed, thought, and worked on the move, died in the summer of 2001. The screen shrank, the tactile keys disappeared, the user habit changed, the shops cleared the cabinets, the software boxes were thrown away, the developers followed the mobile phones, the hardware division closed, the logo remained on the software, the habit of the pocket keyboard was gone. The hardware was gone. Following the cancellation of its consumer division in 2001, Psion retreated entirely from the British high street. The company pivoted toward the brutal, unglamorous world of industrial logistics, manufacturing rugged barcode scanners and mobile computing terminals for warehouses, delivery drivers, and freight companies. The premium consumer brand that had once defined the mobile executive was quietly folded into the background of global supply chains. Eventually, in 2012, the remnants of Psion were acquired by Motorola Solutions. The British hardware pioneer was absorbed by an American communications giant, and the name vanished from public view. But the ghost of the Psion Series 5 lived on, hidden in plain sight. In a massive footnote to mobile technology history, the operating system that began as Epoch 32 did not die. Renamed Symbian, it became the undisputed ruler of the early smartphone era. For the first decade of the 21st century, Symbian powered over half of all smartphones sold globally. If you used a Nokia N95, a Sony Ericsson, or an early Samsung smartphone, you were interacting with the direct, evolved descendant of the software written in London for the Psion clamshell. British software engineering secretly dominated the global mobile market. Yet even Symbian could not survive the seismic platform shift triggered by Apple's iOS and Google's Android. By the early 2010s, Symbian was open-sourced, abandoned, and finally shut down, bringing a quiet end to a software lineage that had lasted for over 2 decades. Today, the surviving Psion hardware is not simply a piece of retro nostalgia. It is not just a dead plastic object kept in boxes by collectors who missed the technology of the late 1990s. The machine still matters because it represents a completely different philosophy of mobile computing, one that the technology industry did not improve upon, but simply abandoned in the rush toward universal convenience. When a user holds a modern smartphone, they are holding a device engineered primarily for consumption. A flat, featureless sheet of glass is designed for endless scrolling, rapid tapping, and passive viewing. It is an extraordinary tool for consuming the internet, but a fundamentally compromised tool for generating complex, original work. The modern digital keyboard is a visual illusion, offering zero tactile feedback, prone to autocorrect errors, and occupying half the screen real estate the moment it appears. The Psion Series 5, by contrast, was engineered for deliberate creation. It was offline by default and connected by choice. When a user opened the clamshell and the physical keyboard slid forward, the machine demanded intent. It was not a device for casually swiping through social media feeds. It was a dedicated tool for writing long documents, calculating complex spreadsheets, and structuring thoughts without the constant interruption of digital notifications. It proved that a pocket computer could be an uncompromised environment for productivity. We traded the mechanical perfection of a dedicated writing tool for the frictionless, highly distracting convenience of a universal glass screen. Because that specific physical experience was lost, a fierce and dedicated preservation community remains active across Britain and the rest of the world. Old Psion machines are kept alive not merely as museum pieces, but as highly prized functional tools. Novelists, journalists, and advocates of distraction-free writing still actively seek out second-hand Series 5 MEMX units on online auction sites. Enthusiasts trade repair manuals, meticulously fixing the notoriously fragile screen ribbon cables that break over time. They engineer modern battery workarounds, write new software patches, and 3D print replacement parts to keep the devices running. The machine is still used on British trains today by writers who want a keyboard that feels perfect and a screen that physically cannot distract them. The desire for that specific hardware layout remains so powerful that decades later, British hardware startups like Planet Computers successfully crowdfunded modern devices like the Gemini PDA and the Astro Slide. These modern machines explicitly copied Psion's iconic sliding clamshell mechanism, running modern Android software, but built entirely around the mechanical promise of the original 1997 keyboard. The digital market still hungered for the physical feedback that Britain had perfected and then left behind. The story of Psion is the story of a technological paradox. Britain built the absolute peak of mobile hardware design, only to discover that the global market no longer wanted a computer in its pocket. The mainstream user wanted a mobile phone that could occasionally act like a computer. Britain did not stop inventing. Psion's engineers were brilliant, their software was structurally revolutionary, and their hardware interface remains a legendary benchmark of industrial design. But the country lost the broader system that turned that invention into a permanent global standard. They lost the high street ecosystem, the developer network, and the scale required to fight international telecommunications giants. The British pocket computer was not defeated by a better typing machine. It was swallowed by the massive, unstoppable convergence of the smartphone. The high street shops that once proudly displayed the black clamshell computers in locked glass cabinets are now filled with rows of identical, flat glass rectangles. The software boxes have long been thrown away. The market moved on, but the hardware itself endures. Somewhere in a British loft, hidden inside a dark leather slipcase at the back of a desk drawer, a Psion Series 5 still rests. You only have to pull it out, slide 2 standard AA batteries into the spine, and press the lid. The screen wakes instantly, the mechanical keyboard slides forward with a firm, perfect click, and for a brief second, you are holding the future exactly as Britain once engineered it. See you in the next one.